Okay, just to start, I'd like to know how many of you are architects. Show of hands. Okay, how many of you consider yourself researchers? Okay, how about journalists, reporters? Nobody, okay, one. Any urban planners? Yeah, okay, that's my no, that's not my presentation. Okay, well, we know cities are becoming more dense. That's not really a news flash. Here's Stockholm's, I guess, the most dense area we've seen planned in Sweden. It's called Hagastaden. It's in the north of Stockholm. Now, the reason I point this particular area out, it's been a bit of a flashpoint with urban density and daylight regulation. Here's an example of one of the projects which has caused a little bit of friction in the system. Now, what you see essentially is a very old sketch. I don't want to be too specific here. A lot of these people are my clients. They're my unwilling clients. Why are they my unwilling clients? Well, they have their projects well designed 90%. They go to get their building permit, and the building permit is denied. I get some very interesting phone calls by some panicked people trying to fix the problem. Well, with a 73 degrees obstruction angle, it can be very difficult to fix the problem. And actually, I see just now that there's actually a balcony there. So there's no view of sky there whatsoever. So this regulation, what is it? Marie-Claude went through it. So I guess I'll just focus on the idea of good access to direct daylight. And we saw there's a daylight factor or a window to floor ratio there. One thing we know is that the focus of the regulation is on the building level. But we know a lot of the damage is actually caused here in the early planning phases. And in Sweden, there's no daylight regulations for the early planning phase. And that's where the problems arise. So here's a little bit of the political dynamic. The politicians, they want a tight or a dense city. They want to meet their housing quotas. So they put pressure on city planners to plan very densely. Then they pass that along to the project team, who then passes something on to the permit issuing city planners. But they, of course, have to answer to the code authorities. They're under tremendous pressure to not do exceptions to the building code. So there's a bit of a fight here, and essentially what happens is the code authorities, they really should be talking to the city planners, but they don't. These are the people we need to talk to. So there's a flashpoint there. These poor people are caught in the middle. So what happens? They put a stop to the building project. The whole industry is not too happy about that. There's a lot of time and money involved here. So people get upset when those two things clash. So what's our idea? How do we fix the problem? Well, there's floor area ratio. I don't know if it's a standard planning metric. So for those of you who don't know, the ratio of a building's total floor area to the size of the piece of land which is built on. We use a definition by the Swedish Rådberg, but it's floor area ratio. And we take vertical sky component. How many are familiar with that metric? Show of hands. Okay, so I'll just quickly review. The ratio of daylight falling on a vertical surface to the daylight available from an unobstructed CI overcast sky. And this is defined from the British Research Establishment in those two documents. Now, this is not new. This has been around since the 60s. We are not reinventing the wheel, not one bit. And floor area ratio is old as well. So what is perhaps new here is that we're trying to combine these two. So vertical sky component, a little more for those of you that are not familiar with it. There's my CIE overcast sky, which is the same sky we use to simulate for the building code. 3 times lighter at the top than at the horizon. I got my little point there. It gets 100% VSC when it's unobstructed. 100% of the light falling from the sky. If I put a vertical surface up, a wall, it's obstructed, so it only gets 40% of the light from the sky. If I put another building there, it's further obstructed, 20% of light from the sky. So if we then move this to 3 dimensions, here we've taken just a quick model of Victoria Station in London. Now you have to excuse this model. Some of the buildings are hovering. This was sort of an early test. So what you see here in yellow is the 100% VSC. Those surfaces receive all the light from the sky. The surfaces in green receive around 40%. And then the surfaces in blue, particularly, you can see there's a range here. Now, what it means is we know there's a point on those facades when essentially the daylight is choked off. There's none available. So our idea, we have the two consultancies, Bow and Bent Dahlgren, and municipal authorities on one hand. Behind us, we have Bulwark, the code authorities. Unfortunately, they don't give us any money. They're not in the habit of funding stuff. But what they have provided us with is a letter of support. And that's been crucial in opening doors. So we ring up the municipalities and tell them our great ideas. And they're already familiar with the problem, perhaps. So, yeah, getting agreement for them is, in many cases, not so hard. So they come back, they give us, they select some neighborhoods. They give us a three-dimensional data of the models of the urban districts that they're interested in. And they give floor area ratios. The idea is that we will produce for them a catalog of, so I say 30 here. We're still not sure if that's 30 or 40 or just when the money's going to run out, but 30 or 40 neighborhoods, a catalog which compares VSC against floor area ratio numerically. Now, of course, the catalog will have some nice, pretty pictures of urban districts to get the architects sort of in there looking at the more intuitive pictures. Now, we're not doing this for free. We get approximately €2,000 for the commune's participation. Does that cover our costs? Does it cover our costs? Not at all. It covers maybe a third of our costs. Why do we want money from them? Well, isn't that just a pain in the butt? Well, no, at the end of it, we're going to say, here's your study that you help pay for, as opposed to, hey, do you want to look at our study? It's not a big fee. It's not a lot of money for them, but it gives us that opportunity to tell them that they have ownership of it. So here are the communes that have signed up already, or the municipalities. Göteborg stad was one of the original. Uppsala, Linköping, Mölndal, Malmö stad. We've been in discussions with these two, Umeå. The one that's been a little difficult is Stockholm stad. There may be some issues there, which I'll discuss in a little bit. But I think part of the problem is they're just such a big organization. It's taken us a year to finally track down who is it that we should be talking to. But I think there's some other issues that need to be addressed there as well. So a little bit about our method. Well, it's kind of complex when you're trying to figure out, well, what's an urban district? We know we've got political boundaries, and here in the white you can see a political boundary. This whole area is referred to as Vasselstaden. Well, how do we begin to divide up that? Well, there are three areas, Rodebergen, Birkestad, and Rörstrand, that we've started to look at. And the basic idea is we're looking somewhat between something that's something that has an identity to the general public. So I can say, oh yeah, the Birkestaden area. And people know what I'm talking about. That's the most important thing. But also that we keep these districts approximately the same size. So we're talking 10 to 15 hectares. Now, when we get the model from the communes, they're of differing level of detail. So quite often, Micho, where are you? He's right there. There's a lot of simplification of the models in post-processing. This is so we can get the approximate geometries of a similar level. We do calculation using Rhino, Grasshopper with the Honeybee suite, and of course that has the Radiance engine to it, with a grid resolution of 1 meter by 1 meter. So a little quickly, the results. We're still sort of in the middle of the project, but I'm just going to show you some of the images to start, and then I'll get into the numerics of it. But here you have a look at that Hagastaden area, and you can see these areas of dark blue. From our experience, we know that those areas are going to have a real difficulty complying with the Swedish code. It would be great at the beginning of the detailed plan phase, as soon as pen hits the paper, to know this, so it doesn't come to be a surprise. Because I'll tell you what, when they didn't get their building permit, they were very surprised. They had no idea. Area in Gothenburg where we're working. Interesting with the inner courtyards there of the existing fabric. You can see there's some very dark areas in there, and that supports Marie-Claude's idea that, well, yeah, maybe not all rooms in an apartment can comply. Another area here, Frihamnen in Gothenburg, Vallastaden in Linköping. A very interesting, there's a lot of focus on this project. It's a very interesting way to do urban planning. So a lot of curiosity. We haven't got the floor area ratio from them yet, but very interested to see where this project lands. Now, traditionally, the BRE said, well, a VSC of 27%, you had good access. A VSC of 15%, you had limited daylight, and a VSC of less than 5% was dark. We've massaged these numbers based a little bit on our experience. So we're binning data into 3 different bins here. So what we're saying is, on the top level, on the facade, you have your average across the facade there and your lowest floor. So here you can see on the lowest floor, 25% of the area of the facade, the lowest floor, had what we could say good access. 31%, nah, and 44% dark. So in this manner, you can very quickly, graphically, compare how the projects are doing against one another. So we took a look at average VSC against floor area ratio, and it really didn't tell us a lot. We're kind of disappointed. But then we looked at the lowest floor, and it's still early. We're still, I'd like another 30 points or 20 points on this graph before I can, but you can begin to see there's a bit of a relationship there between VSC and FAR. And I just think, wouldn't it be wonderful as soon as you start with a planning project? Yeah, okay, I know my floor area ratio is going to be 2. What can I expect for, what portion of my facades can we expect are going to be dark? So the challenges we've faced, well, 3D models that are poor, lacking in quality, so there's a lot of extra work, a lack of floor area ratio data, the selected area by the commune may be too small, that it's maybe 3 or 4 buildings. We feel obligated to simulate it, but we can't really use it in our publication. But this is, I think, when we talk about certain big cities in Sweden, not naming anybody, well, they're very busy with an existing workload. But there's a political pressure to meet housing quotas. That shouldn't be missed. And that when they sell that land, when they sell their land, they sell that based on how much the developer can use to build on. So if we come in and we start saying, well, daylight's going to restrict this, there's a perception that it may not be in their interest to be involved in such a project. This is a bit of a challenge as well, that we were originally interested to see, well, what do we have? So we're looking at the existing urban districts, but actually the cities that we were working with are really interested in testing their new neighborhoods. Now, in some ways, that's a little frustrating, but in other ways, that's actually really what we should be doing anyways. So it's a bit of a victory. So a little bit of our future directions. Here's an example of a test that we have. These two designs, they're different designs, but with the same density. So it shows you an example. This alternate design here had a much better performance for the average daylight, or sorry, the VSC on the lowest floor. So you can work with this method to optimize. So future directions, correlation between vertical sky component and daylight levels inside, that we're hoping to get a little bit from Lund. Urban scale climate-based metrics after Christoph Reinhardt's work, and workshops for planners. So summary, well, let's face it, we're not always going to get the daylight levels that we want with increased urban density. But VSC can help the situation somewhat, both through optimization, which I just showed you an example of, but also as a tool of negotiation. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's say you want a dog. You want a little dog, right? Everybody wants a little dog. And I agree, I'm going to get you that dog. At the end of the week, I'm going to deliver this little dog to you. But I can only get you a big dog. You probably want to know beforehand. You're going to ask yourself, is a big dog really what I want? Am I prepared to accept this? Okay, if the answer is yeah, well, what's the cost? And that's sort of what we're trying to do with VSC, is it lets you know exactly what you're getting early in the process, as soon as pen hits the paper, and also the potential costs of your decision. So if you say, yeah, we're going to have a FAR of 5, you know that you can accept a certain percentage of dark facades ready from the onset. So there's no nasty surprises in the end. Thank you very much.